What if the British never came to India? Not if they left earlier or lost a battle. What if they never arrived at all? The result is something more complex than an endless golden age or a perfect utopia. To find a realistic answer, we have to look at the specific regional powers and economic networks that were already functioning independently. We're tracking the momentum of internal forces that the British presence historically redirected. When the British East India Company, a heavily armed corporate trading fleet, began expanding its reach, they did not step into a quiet, unified nation waiting to be conquered. Removing the British from the timeline changes who fills the power vacuum forming inside the subcontinent. By the early 1700s, the dominant Mughal Empire was fracturing. Weak successors, mounting administrative decay, and severe financial strain were breaking the central authority apart from the inside. Into that void stepped ambitious regional powers. The Marathas expanded aggressively across the west and center. The Sikhs consolidated power in the northwest, and Mysore built a highly capable military state in the south. Look at this map of the 18th century. As the Mughal borders shrink, distinct expanding territories take over. Without a foreign power violently forcing these regions under a single administrative umbrella, India's default trajectory was a highly competitive, multipolar landscape. Those shifting borders eventually solidify. Instead of one massive imperial bureaucracy binding everyone together, the subcontinent develops politically like Europe or East Asia, a collection of distinct, competing states, each evolving at its own speed. Steam engines and factories would still arrive in the region. Indian states and powerful merchant networks would build them to integrate their own trade routes, move grain, and defend their borders against neighboring rivals. Take a look at this intricate indigenous weaving structure. Without colonial policies designed to protect British mills, textile centers in Gujarat and Bengal would transition their massive output into the industrial age on their own terms. Indian shipyards would adapt to steam to protect local trade. The economic geography of the region moves inland. Coastal ports like Bombay were designed for extraction. Without them, older centers like Pune, Lahore, and Hyderabad retained their dominance as independent commercial capitals. Progress across the region becomes a patchwork. One kingdom modernizes its factories rapidly to gain a military edge, while a neighboring state falls behind. The push for technology is driven by internal competition. The biggest economic change is the money. Under British rule, revenue, raw materials, and labor were systematically drained to serve the empire. If the British never arrive, that capital stays inside the subcontinent. Retained wealth does not create a fair society. Power, land, and money remain heavily concentrated in the hands of royal elites, powerful landlords, and wealthy merchant families. Rural peasants remain vulnerable to taxes and bad harvests. Protecting that regional wealth requires force. This photograph shows organized, uniformed Sikh soldiers. Indian rulers would pour their capital into strong cavalry systems, advanced artillery, and standing armies to deter their rivals. You end up with an alternate India that is significantly wealthier, yet locked in intense regional rivalries. These independent states spent decades balancing heavy militarization with complex trade alliances. The psychology of the civilization shifts. English exists as a useful tool for coastal trade or diplomacy, but it never becomes the dominant language of political power or the primary filter for higher education. We see that continuity in artifacts like this preserved manuscript. Higher education, statecraft, and legal administration remain deeply rooted in the continuous evolution of regional languages like Persian, Marathi, Bengali, and Tamil. We also must acknowledge the darker side of that continuity. Untouchability, harsh patriarchal norms, and extreme caste hierarchies survive. The absence of British rule does not erase internal social evils. The difference is how reform happens. Change is driven internally by local scholars, merchants, and religious movements. A kingdom might mandate education for women to build its tax base, while another abolishes oppressive practices much later. The evolution is slower, but deeply organic. Look at the scale and density of the population in this architectural space. Internal religious and regional tensions brew here naturally. But without a central colonial administration drawing hasty lines on a map, the exact 1947 partition does not happen. Society modernizes unevenly. It wrestles with its own flaws, but it retains a direct, unbroken psychological link to its civilizational past. Without the tax revenue, the millions of soldiers, and the strategic positioning India provided, the British Empire loses its primary source of global leverage. The British Crown becomes a regional European power much earlier than in our own timeline, lacking the wealth to shape Asian trade routes or dominate global shipping. By 2025, the subcontinent stands as a group of sovereign nations or a confederation. Metropolises feature local architectural styles integrated with modern transit and high-capacity infrastructure. This alternate India traded rapid, forced, centralized unification for a slower, independent political evolution. The strength of a nation comes from who has the authority to chart its future, own its resources, and make its own mistakes. In this world, India is not a single giant born of colonial exit, but a family of states that belongs to itself.